then I remembered again all that money I'd buried and was going to give my nephew, and maybe he wouldn't even get my letter and the money would be wasted. In my travels around the world, I'd seen so many places where missionaries were needed, and I thought maybe in a few minutes I'd be in heaven, seeing Jesus face to face, and he'd ask me why I hadn't used some of that money for missionary work. Then the old man went on with his story. Well, the robber heard me praying, and it made him angry. "Shut up!" he shouted. He raised his fist like he was going to hit me. So I didn't pray out loud, although I kept right on praying silently, knowing God could hear anyway, and telling him I was ready to die because I knew he'd sent his son Jesus to save me, and I had believed on him in my heart. "All right, Grandpa," said the fierce-looking man roughly. "Let's get those whiskers off, or shall I take you out somewhere and bury you?" He came over to me and took hold of my beard and gave it a little jerk. Then he laughed and said, "They're real whiskers, all right, and your hair is genuine too. I lost a wig and beard just like the ones I have on now by the swamp a few days ago." He stood there looking at me as if he was trying to think of some way to get mine off so he could use them in case he needed them. I could see he was a wicked man and might do anything, and with his gun pointing straight at me, I began to think how I might save myself for a little while at least. So I said, maybe you'd like to know where my money is buried." The old man poured himself another cup of sassafras. All the time I was hoping my nephew would come, yet afraid to have him come because he might get hurt. So I told the robber where to dig, and he must have decided to let me live a little while longer, for he put a gag in my mouth and went away, leaving me all tied up just like he found me. Just as he went out the door, he said, "Listen, Grandpa Paddler, if you've lied to me, I'll come back, and you can tell this world goodbye." And that was the last I saw him. The old man sighed as if he was tired of talking. Anyway, that was his side of the story, and you know what happened after that, how the robber had seen us boys digging there by the rose bush and had come back himself, and we had captured him. We thanked old man Paddler for telling us the story and promised to come back and see him again, and that we'd go see his nephew and tell him his uncle was alive and well and not to worry. He thanked us over and over again for coming down to untie him, and then we left. Down by the spring where Dragonfly and I had gone for water, we lay down one at a time and drank horse fashion. Then we looked up at the cabin. Blue smoke was rising slowly out of the chimney, and the old man was standing in the doorway, his long white whiskers shining in the afternoon sun. He lifted his hand and waved goodbye to us. No, he had both hands raised, like a picture in my Bible storybook where an old prophet was raising his hands to bless somebody. For a minute I thought of that funny clown I'd seen the other night, which had looked like an old man with long light hairs and whiskers down to his waist. Then we started down the hill toward home, not forgetting to stop by the swimming hole for a good swim so we could tell our folks we wouldn't need a bath tonight. This night being Saturday, all boys having to take a bath on Saturday whether they want to or not. Some of us even had to take them oftener than that. Chapter 12. Did I tell you that we nearly always went down went to town on Saturday nights? We had to, to buy groceries and things. So when we were dressed, Dad called, and soon we were driving along in our car toward town, which was about 50 miles away. Now don't you get into any mischief, said Dad to me when we stopped in front of the big fountain on the main street. I slid out of the car and ran over to where Poetry and Dragonfly were waiting for me. "Hello, Bill," they said. "Hello, Dragonfly. Hello, Poetry." They were both wearing their Sunday clothes. We were watching the water spraying down from above and falling into a big cement pool right in front of us. Electric lights shone down on it from lampposts all around. You could see maybe a dozen goldfish swimming around in the pool. With the water splashing and the band playing up the street and hundreds of people standing around, talking and laughing, and especially with Poetry and Dragonfly there, all of us liking each other a lot, it seemed good to be alive. "I wonder if it's deep enough to swim in," Poetry said. I was thinking the same thing, and probably so was Dragonfly. We had to go away and quit watching that fountain because it made us want to go swimming so bad. It made us feel sad all over. We started walking along Main Street, Poetry in the middle, and Dragonfly and me on each side of him. All of a sudden, Dragonfly said, "Psst," just as he always does when he's either seen or heard something very important. Soon we stopped quick to find out what it was. It's Circus's dad," he said. "See him walking crazy like? I'll bet he's drunk again." And sure enough, he was. I hope he hasn't got a gun," I said, remembering that he always carried one when he went hunting and was an awful good shot. He kept shuffling along, reaching out with each foot as though he was having trouble finding the sidewalk. "Let's follow him and see where he goes," Poetry said. Pretty soon we staggered up to a place where they sell beer and kind of fell against the door. Then he pushed it open and went inside. We stood looking through a smoky glass door panel and saw him lean up against the bar and throw down some money and say something to the bartender. It was disgusting to see him, that big, fat-stomached bartender, take the money and give him another glass of beer, when I knew Circus's folks were poor and needed all the money they could get for food and clothes and things. I was glad little Jim wasn't with us. He would have felt so bad about it. He liked Circus so well that he wouldn't have had any fun at all. As it was, it sort of took away the good taste of the bag of peanuts we were eating at that minute. We went on walking around, feeling kind of sad. Pretty soon we saw Circus himself sitting alone on a bench in front of an empty store building, looking like he'd lost his very best friend. "Hello, Circus," I said, and Poetry and Dragonfly said the same thing. We offered him some of our peanuts and sat down beside him. "What's the matter?" I asked. But he didn't answer. He just kept sitting there, looking unhappy, not even taking any peanuts. I noticed he didn't have on nearly as nice clothes as the rest of us, though they were clean and neat. His shoes were old too, but he had them pretty well polished, and they looked all right. He had a very good mother. "Wait a minute," Dragonfly said. He got up and ran down the street and came back with a big bag of fresh popcorn, knowing Circus liked popcorn better than anything. But Circus didn't even take any popcorn, and we didn't even try very hard to make him. We all sat there feeling unhappy, none of us saying anything for a long time. And finally Circus says, "Dad's drunk again." Then he sighed and took some of my peanuts and Dragonfly's popcorn. Up the street, the band was playing a beautiful number, "The Stars and Stripes Forever." People were walking past in front of us, going both ways, talking and laughing. Everybody seemed happy except us. "That's a pretty nice band piece," Circus said. "I always wanted to play in a band. Maybe someday I'll run away from home and get a job and make enough money to buy a cornet." "Doesn't your mother like you anymore?" Dragonfly asked. Circus choked on the popcorn he had in his mouth and coughed a little. Then he said, "Maybe if I ran away and got some work, I could send her the money I made." Just then, Circus's dad came shuffling down the street. In an instant, Circus was out of his seat and running into an alley as fast as he could go, with us right after him. I thought maybe he was going to run away from home right now, and I didn't want him to because I knew how his mother would feel. In the alley, about a block from the main street, we stopped behind somebody's garage where there wasn't any light and listened for a minute to see if anybody was coming. Nobody was. "He's mad at me," Circus said, "because I went into the saloon about a half hour ago and told him to stop drinking or I'd tell Mother. He'll give me a terrible licking if he catches me." Right beside us was a telephone pole, and I couldn't help but think that if Circus was happy, he'd likely be halfway up the top of it by now. There was also the brightest, roundest moon up in the sky, and if Poetry had been happy, he probably would have started to say, "Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the pillow, the cow jumped over the moon, the little dog laughed to see such sports, and the dish ran away with a spoon." We stayed there in the shadow for that little garage for maybe 5 minutes, thinking and saying different things. I was wishing Circus was my brother so he could have my dad for his daddy. When all of a sudden we heard footsteps coming down the alley, we crowded down behind a big box and waited. And would you believe it? In a minute, 2 men stopped there in the dark, and one of them was my dad, and the other was Circus's. You can guess we had a hard time keeping still, and I can't tell you how weird I felt inside. "You're making a big fool out of yourself," my dad said disgustedly. Circus's dad swore and said, "I don't want any more kids. 3 girls and 1 good-for-nothing boy is enough." My fist doubled up when he said that. I knew he was talking about Circus, and I reckoned maybe it isn't wrong to get mad at something like that. I peeped from behind the box, and I could see my dad standing there, tall and straight in the moonlight, looking clean and good. Circus's dad was slouched over with his hat on crooked and some of his hair messed up, sticking out on one side. His tie was twisted and his face, what I could see of it, looked terrible. For a minute I remembered what Big Jim had said that afternoon about Sid, quoting a quoting from the Bible, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked." I decided nobody could fool God. It was like my dad had just said. Circus's father was making a big fool out of himself. "You listen, Dan Brown," said Dad, roughly. You're not drinking another drop tonight, do you hear? Shred of your business." Circus's father grumbled back and swore again. "It's my money, and I'll spend it like I please. Anyway, when a new baby comes to my house, I've got a right to celebrate." But now my dad was getting angry, with the right kind of anger. He reached out his big strong hands and grabbed Circus's dad by the shoulders and shook him like a big dog shakes a rat and said, "You want to celebrate by getting on your knees down and Brown and praying to God Almighty that He'll forgive you for your sins and make you a good enough father to your children and a decent husband to your wife. Mrs. Brown is one of the grandest little women that ever drew breath, and your boy is one of the finest boys in the country. And you? Shame on you, Dan Brown." Well, my dad wouldn't let Circus's father go home that night because he knew he'd make all kinds of trouble and maybe do something terrible. So he hunted up the town marshal, which is the same as a policeman, and they locked him up in jail, which is where he belonged. And that's how we came to learn that Circus had a new baby at his house too. Also, that's how Circus came to stay all night at my house. With a new baby at his place, there might be a lot of excitement. Besides, Big Jim's mother was staying there too to help take care of the baby, so there wouldn't be beds enough. Circus said he would just as soon sleep in the barn. He'd done it before when his dad was mad at him about something. But they wouldn't want a noisy boy around right now. My dad drove all the way to Circus's house to tell them that Circus was going to sleep with me tonight. His folks not having a telephone because his dad used most of their money for whiskey and beer. Then Dad stopped at Big Jim's house and made arrangements for somebody to do the chores at Circus's. The next morning, since Big Jim lived right across the road from them anyway.